Hey, welcome back to my kitchen. My name is Shanae, and today we're going to make classic chocolate eclairs filled with rich and smooth pastry cream and glazed with chocolate ganache. It's hands down my favorite childhood treat and one of my mom's specialties. I grew up eating them all the time. They may look fancy and all, but let me tell you, they're really easy to make and requires very basic ingredients that you probably have on hand. And if you're a perfectionist and would like to learn how to make this flawless, perfectly straight and even eclair shells, I'm going to share with you 8 tips along the way, so pay close attention to those details and you will get perfect result every time. But regardless how they look, they are going to taste like $1,000,000. So let's get started. For this recipe, you will need water, flour, butter, eggs, a little bit sugar, and salt. So first we'll need to add water in a saucepan along with butter and sugar and salt. And then we'll bring this mixture to boil slowly. We need to melt the sugar and salt before it comes to a boil. So in the medium-low heat, we're going to slowly heat the water and stir it so that the sugar melts. It's very important. If you bring it rapidly to a boil before sugar melts, you'll lose too much moisture from the water and your recipe ratio will be off. While this recipe requires very basic ingredients, it's very important for the ratio to be correct so that you can achieve perfect shells. I feel like the sugar is melted at this point, so I'm going to increase the heat to medium and bring it to a boil. And while my water with butter is coming to a boil, I'm going to sift my flour. I highly recommend sifting it not to have any lumps in your flour, otherwise you will have flour balls in your dough and that's not ideal. It's highly recommended to use bread flour, like high gluten flour, because it yields crispier shells, but I usually use all-purpose flour because that's what I usually have in my kitchen and it works just fine. Just keep in mind that the shells are a little softer. And another thing I want to mention is that a lot of recipes call for water and milk. I like to use water only for my recipe because it yields crispier shells. When you add with milk, the shells are like a little more rich and tender and works perfectly for cream puffs, for example, but for eclair shells, when I want nice and crisp shells, I omit the milk and I go with all water. My water just came to a boil and I'm taking it off the heat for a moment and then I'll add the flour. You don't want to whisk the flour into the water because you want to add it all at once. It's called shooting in the flour, the technique is called, and this will prevent any lumps in your dough. So tip number 2 is to prevent any dough lumps. Make sure to sift the flour and add the flour off heat and stir it in so that it's completely incorporated. And now we'll put it back on the burner and then we'll cook it over medium-high heat for about 5 minutes. We want to evaporate as much moisture at this point so that we can add as much eggs as we can into the dough because eggs help for the dough to rise in the oven, creating that beautiful hollow center in the middle. Choux pastry is twice cooked pastry, which means we cook dough first on the stovetop and then bake it for the second round. And then spread it on the bottom of the saucepan to cook it evenly, fold it over and do it again. We want to cook the dough evenly as possible. And if you're using stainless steel saucepan, you will start noticing you have a film forming on the bottom of your pan. If it's forming too soon, decrease your heat a little bit so that we can cook the dough a little longer. We want to cook it for about 5 minutes. And then I'll continue cooking like this and I'll show you the next step. So we'll cook the dough for 1 more minute. So this is the tip number 3. You want to make sure to cook the dough enough to evaporate as much moisture as possible. That way your dough will absorb as many eggs as possible. That way you'll get nice lift on your eclairs. And you'll have to play with your heat because you want to hear this light sizzle. I'm not sure if you can hear it. Light sizzling sound, and that's a good sign that you are at the right temperature. And we'll cook it like so for about half a minute now. It's almost done. What you want to see is it will form into a ball like so, and then when you stick a spoon, it should hold it. Also, if you're using stainless steel saucepan, you will get this nice film on the bottom. You will get this with a non-stick pan. So I usually recommend using stainless steel pan because you can tell the signs better. My dough is ready. Now, you don't need to have a mixer, but I like to use my stand mixer because it's easier. We want to cool this dough. It's called panade, and we're going to cool this panade before we add the eggs. If we add eggs right now, you will just scramble the eggs and it won't be good. And we'll use paddle attachment, and we will whip it on a medium speed until just it cools for about a couple of minutes. And this is tip number 4. We don't want to whip the panade too fast or too long, because then you will start releasing the fat from the dough and it will yield to all sorts of issues that you don't want. So make sure to take it easy and don't walk away. So my dough is cooled nicely. You want to be able to comfortably touch the bowl, and if you can, that means it's cooled down enough. And now tip number 5, we don't want to add eggs all at once because we might not need all the eggs. And I like to break and add 1 egg at a time. Some people beat all the eggs at once and then add it a little at a time. You can do whatever works best for you, but this is how I do it. And then I will run the mixer on medium-low speed and then add the eggs 1 at a time and make sure to mix it well before adding the next egg. It should be completely incorporated, and then you will add the next egg. So the dough has 3 eggs in it, and I wanted to show you the consistency because I would like you to know what consistency we're looking for. So this is too thick. After 3 eggs, it's pretty thick, so I'm going to scrape the bowl really well and then add 1 more. So with this recipe, for sure, you should be able to add 4 eggs. And on the 5th one, I typically add the whole 5th egg. It works out just perfectly for me, but just to be sure, in case you didn't evaporate as much moisture at the cooking stage, you might want to beat the last egg and add like a little at a time. And I'll show you the proper consistency. So after the 4th egg, the consistency is like this. You don't want too runny. It should slowly fall off the spatula. We're almost there. It's a little thick. We're very close. So I'm going to add half of the last egg. I already beat it. I'm going to add half of it. Should be good. Scrape the side of the bowl. Okay, this batter looking good. I'll show you now. Your dough should be nice and glossy. Do you see how glossy it is? You want the dough to be glossy like this and thick to fall off the spatula like this, and then leave a V-shape dough here. So this is very important. Hook it and falls off the spatula and creates a V. You don't want to add too much eggs because then you will get very runny batter, and in that case your shells are going to be really flat and not gonna rise well. So now I'm going to transfer it into my piping bag. So I have my piping bag fitted with a piping tip, and I'll just place it into a tall bowl because it's really tricky to transfer the batter. Will be much easier like this. So tip number 6 is we're not ready to pipe the eclairs. We're going to rest it for at least 1 hour, or you can actually keep this dough up to 2 days in the fridge if you would like. Just make sure to bring it to room temperature before you pipe the eclairs. And resting the batter creates nice, even shells. I don't have explanation why that works like that, but I saw that tip somewhere and I tried it and actually works. So I'm going to flatten the dough a little bit. We don't want too much bubbles in our batter so that it pipes really nice and even. Okay, make sure to completely close off the batter so it doesn't dry out. And then I'll see you in 1 hour. So my batter has been resting for a little over an hour, and I'm ready to pipe the eclair shells. And I also preheated my oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit, and I have 2 baking sheets with parchment paper, and we'll pipe about 12 logs on each baking sheet. I highly recommend using a star tip, preferably French star tip, but I have a Wilton 8B, which works perfectly for me as well. I prefer star tip over round tip because I feel like they come out straighter and more even that way. Another important tip is make sure not to pipe too wide logs because they will become really wide because remember the eclairs expand during baking. So try to bake as narrow logs as possible. You want to hold your pastry bag at 45 degrees and with the continuous even pressure, keep piping and moving your piping back so that it doesn't stay in one place too long, otherwise you will have wider logs. So let me show you. We'll pipe about a dozen logs on each baking sheet and 4 inches. Now wet your fingers and push on these pointy ends so that they don't burn. If you don't flatten it out, it will burn. You can also use wet fingers to manipulate the batter into a shape if you have a misshapen one like this one. And just push it around. If you have your fingers wet, it won't stick. All right, my eclair shells are ready for baking. I'm going to bake it at 375 degrees for about 30-35 minutes. And I will have to mention my tip number 8 right now because it's very important. You don't want to peek into your oven while it's baking. And I like to bake 1 tray at a time because if you bake 2 sheets at a time, you'll have to rotate halfway, and that introduces risk of collapsing your eclairs because you want to wait for the eclair shells to set while in the oven and before you open your oven. Your shells needs all that steam to rise and bake properly for that beautiful hollow center. And if you open your oven, you will release that steam and you risk your shells to collapse, and that's not what we want. So I'm gonna go ahead and bake it, and I'll see you in about 35 minutes. So my first tray of eclairs came out and they cooled slightly. They are looking perfect. They are not as crispy as but that's on purpose. First, while the second batch is baking, what I like to do is we're going to make little holes on the bottom to fill the eclairs. There are 2 ways to fill the eclairs. One, you can make a slit on the side and pipe the filling through any of the cracks and crannies, or you can make 2 holes on the bottom and fill that way. I prefer this way because much cleaner look. So I'll show you. I have my Wilton 12 round tip, and I'm going to drill a hole like so on You can do 2. For this size, 2 is perfect. And using a toothpick or a stick like this, you just push it through and make sure it's nice and hollow inside. So we're preparing for the filling. I'll do all of this right now. And then when the second tray comes out, I'll bake this for about another 5 minutes just to dry out the inside to make them even more crispy. That way, when we add the filling is really wet, they will hold their shape really nicely and you will have that beautiful contrast of crisp shells and soft and creamy filling. So we're gonna go ahead and do all the rest of this and we'll show you the next step. So my eclair shells are baked for 5 additional minutes and completely cooled. And I also made chocolate ganache for the glaze. If you haven't watched my chocolate ganache video, I'll link it up here. Basically, I poured hot cream over chocolate chips, stirred it until it's nice and smooth, and then I added a tablespoon of butter for nice shine. You can also add corn syrup if you would like. It will have a nice shiny effect on them. And I have my pastry cream ready as well in a pastry bag fitted with a piping tip. I like to use this special filling tip. So make sure your eclair shells are completely cooled so that you're not gonna melt your pastry cream and it will be easy to work. And by the way, I accidentally broke this shell and I wanted to show you how hollow it is. I have a cream diplomat here. If you haven't watched my video, I will link it up here as well. So we'll put the tip into the hole and start piping until you'll see the filling from the other hole. See? Perfect. Do not skimp on the filling. Your eclairs should feel heavy for their size. So we'll just keep going. And you can also fill it from the other hole too. You will know when it's full. So now you can clean up the bottoms. Now we're gonna dip in a chocolate ganache. How pretty is this? Oh my goodness, looks so perfect. When you dip in the chocolate ganache, make sure to cover the sides as well. Just push them both sides. Wiggle them a little bit. If your ganache is cooled too much and it's too thick, you can always put it in a microwave for about half a second or 20 seconds to thin it out. So my eclairs are filled and glazed. Ideally, now you want to let it set for at least an hour in the fridge before serving. But who has the patience? Not I. So I'm going to dive right in and give it a quick taste test. When you set it, the ganache hardens a little bit and that creates a really nice texture as well. So keep that in mind. You want to let it set. But for the video, I'm gonna give it a taste test and make sure it's good. So good. I don't know. I don't have any other words than so good because the shells have this nice crispness and the filling is so creamy. Can you see this? And the chocolate, I used semi-sweet chocolate, so it has a little bit bitterness, not completely super sweet, and it's just heaven. Oh my goodness. I really hope you will give this recipe a try. And if you do, please let me know in the comments below or share a picture on Instagram and tag me at Shineshka. I love seeing your creations and I love hearing your feedback. And until next time, bye.